the teams and the enterprises that have succeeded most in LLMs are the ones who have built software themselves. So they haven't built a model, but they've gone and built a web tool or a framework or their own chat app, given it all the data it needs, given it context, customized it for their teams, and they've been very successful. And the people who have bought have been less successful.
On this episode, I speak with David Sykes. David grew and led the data science team at Octopus Energy over an 8-year period. This spanned their days as a small Soho-based startup with 100 people to their current position as the UK's largest supplier of household energy. Many of you need a stronger perspective on AI and its impact on sustainability teams. David and I talk about AI tools in general and which business functions are most likely to benefit from them. We discuss specific areas where sustainability teams will see rapid value and some levers that might be harder to pull. We throw in actionable advice for sustainability professionals. I started the conversation by asking David for an overview of where AI brought value to Octopus Energy.
So when I think about AI, I think about sort of two flavors of AI because it's become a bit murky since ChatGPT arrived on the scene and Gen AI became mainstream. So I think you've got sort of traditional AI and then generative AI. So Gen AI is what 99% of people will think about when they think about AI. It's typing something into ChatGPT and getting an answer, or creating an image on Gemini, or creating a video, or doing text-to-speech, that kind of thing. And then traditional AI is where you typically have like one very specific use case that you've trained an algorithm to work on. And so most of my career at Octopus, most of the sort of 8 years that I was there, was actually in this sort of traditional AI paradigm. It was pre these generative AI models and LLMs being accessible to a wider market. And so much of the stuff we were doing was using sort of traditional machine learning and AI algorithms to solve a specific business problem. So that might be determining whether someone was sort of fit to pay. It might be classifying a customer service message so we can try and route it better. And then we did a lot of work on forecasting because, an energy supplier's main job is to balance supply and demand and not go bust. And so there was a lot of work to be done on time series forecasting and that kind of AI. Towards the back end of when I was there, ChatGPT dropped, and we were sort of one of the very early companies in the UK to start to throw that straight into customer service. So Greg was very clear that he thought this was the future and he was willing to try stuff when a lot of other companies were sort of terrified of what might happen if you put a robot in the mix. And so then we really started to expand our AI work into customer service. So basically, it was never answering a customer directly when I was there, but how do you augment a customer service agent so they can answer way more questions to a customer way more accurately, but maintain all of that sort of beautiful human touch that Octopus was very famous for.
Thanks, David. Super insightful and a really nice way to ground us. If I maybe move on to a sort of a softball big picture question, again, thinking really about orienting this towards sustainability functions and teams. When it comes to the use cases for AI and business functions, what are you seeing? And you obviously touched on a few in the Octopus context: pricing, costing, managing those things, customer support and customer service. Are there certain functions within a traditional business, think of like a consumer packaged goods company or the like, which is doing procurement and sales and IT and so on. Which functions do you think have the most potential for change, and what are the kinds of use cases that you would expect to see?
I think what's very interesting now is that Gen AI is absolutely everywhere. I think this week, Sam Altman announced that OpenAI is at 800 million weekly active users, which is a terrifyingly big number. WhatsApp now has Meta AI built into WhatsApp. They've got 3 billion users. And very interestingly, they have users in many of the lowest income countries and regions. And sort of, I like to think anecdotally and through statistics. And anecdotally, I know it's everywhere because, my parents are using it. And when your civil servant friends come and speak to you about a new technology, you know that it's sort of permeated every corner of every sort of dusty institution. And so it is everywhere and has now hundreds of millions, if not billions of users. I think the usage of it in business is sort of, again, like twofold. So there's this, what I'd call sanctioned use, which is where a forward-thinking CEO, CTO has gone and bought a tool, maybe an enterprise OpenAI license, or maybe a specific SaaS tool for a specific challenge, and has given everyone licenses to use that tool. And then there's the unsanctioned underground economy of Gen AI, which is basically everybody using their personal licenses to help them do their job without IT knowing. And I think right now, the formal usage, the sort of sanctioned use, there was an MIT study recently that suggested that's about 40%. And the unsanctioned use is up around 90% of companies. So 90% of companies and organizations have employees that have said they're using AI in some form.
This is like HMRC uploading my R&D claims into ChatGPT, for example.
Exactly that. Like, it's someone who has got so frustrated with the sort of Copilot tool that they've been given that they just know that they can get it out of ChatGPT because they use it personally. And so that's really interesting because, much of the reporting about success and how well it's going is around these sanctioned use cases, these sort of pilots and programs. And a lot of them are quite dispiriting. So there was one that came out recently that said sort of 95% of pilots went nowhere and, aren't creating value for businesses. Whereas it's quite clear that this stuff is creating value, but it's creating value in the same way that sort of introducing Excel to your business creates value. You can't quantify it, but you know it's there because everybody is using it. And then I think the third sort of trend or observation I see is that the usage patterns are still extremely basic. So basically, most people ask ChatGPT as if they were asking Google. They just type something into ChatGPT as if they're asking Google. Whereas if you look at the sectors which have gone deeper with AI, so coding is probably the one right at the front. The tooling is so much more sophisticated. You've sort of got multiple models running in the background. It can edit your files. It has all of your work context. It can push to GitHub. And so, in terms of how it's impacting businesses, I think basically functions will be on that curve of, is that everybody's probably using it right now, but is everybody using it just as a search interface? Or have I started to get really useful, like vertical specific or role specific tools like Cursor or like Windsurf? So yeah, that's the trend. And then in terms of departments, it's kind of a no-brainer in terms of answering that question because there's sort of three dimensions. One is, how controlled or regulated is your department? So how much appetite do you have for risk? If you are, in the legal department and you're doing massive contracts, you're probably not going to let AI just do the whole job for you. How digital or physical is your job? So if your job is to produce code, which is a digital artifact, obviously AI is really good for you. If your job is to go and speak to a bunch of coffee farmers in Africa and figure out how to get a sustainable coffee into your market, AI is no good to you. And then finally, how relationship-based is your job? So if your job is all about talking to people and building relationships and maintaining them, then AI is not that helpful for you right now. And here I speak to a lot of diplomats and I say to them that their job will be the last to go because it's like a pure human-to-human relationship job, which is something AI just can't do.
David, you're using as a filter the nature of the role. I love your framework, by the way, of saying how much appetite for risk does your function have? Like how exposed is it to getting things wrong or right being a major driver? How digital or physical is it? And then how relationship-based is it? At the same time, I wonder whether there's also a workflow component. So when you say, for example, most people are using this the way that they would use Google, I think there's an implicit assumption there that there's actually a right way to use this in general, regardless of which function you're in. The study that I really liked on this was I think it was the Harvard and BCG study from a couple of years ago, which said that there's like a cyborg and a centaur approach. I don't know if you've read that one, but just to recap for our listeners, the study looked at a number of consulting teams and they enabled each of those consulting teams with Gen AI, and then they had a control as well. And they found that in general, the teams that used Gen AI performed better than the ones that didn't. But at the same time, the ones that did use Gen AI used it in different ways. And so the cyborg approach was where the individual human back and forthed with the AI. So basically, you kind of riffed with the AI, you made changes, you made adjustments, etc. And so, for instance, if I think about our business of, let's say, carbon accounting and sustainability data, a good example is when we ingest data, the AI will tell you, hey, here are some things I spotted. These look weird. Do these look weird to you and should I fix them? And you say, yes, that one looks weird. Please fix it. No, that one doesn't. You're sort of going back and forth with the AI. And that's the cyborg approach. You're sort of blended in. The centaur approach is where you split the work out and you say, this is the piece for AI. and this is the piece for the human. So maybe the piece for AI is matching an emissions factor to a piece of business data to run a calculation, and the piece for the human is saying, okay, what is the new initiative I need to build to reduce this part of my emissions estate? And that's the Centaur approach, where you kind of create the split. Does this split make sense to you? And actually, would you kind of say, when you look at your three types of filters, would you say it's just that there's less room for you to do any of these things in an area where you're going out to explore a cocoa farm? It's not that you can kind of have one or the other. Is there a workflow element here, I guess, where everyone should actually have a certain way of working with AI, and the potential impact is more or less depending on where you sit in the business?
Yeah, 100%. So I've not heard the Centaur versus Cyborg, but I love it. Definitely, it's a workflow thing. I think one of the studies found that the AI not fitting your workflow was one of the main blockers to using AI. And if you imagine, if you're using an AI, but you're having to copy and paste in and out of your tool, or you're having to context switch between tools all the time, that's really no good. And so there's an amazing YouTube video by Andrej Karpathy, who is the head of AI, ex-head of AI at Tesla, where he talks about software 3.0 and how we need to build tools now that augment humans. And he talks about a generation verification loop. So, the AI generates something, the human verifies it. The AI generates something, the human verifies it. My Twitter is full of people talking about coding tools in AI. And so you think that everybody in the world is using AI to generate code. And then you look at the statistics, and 4% of people are using AI to generate code, and 96% are using it to find the next washing machine that they want to buy. And so we live in this bubble, but in that 4% bubble of people who are using AI to generate code, there's an amazing set of tools called IDEs, which are basically this, like the Excel for someone who does spreadsheets. It's the tool you write your code in. The reason they're so powerful right now is that they do this cyborg type thing. So what they do is they provide the traditional GUI that you can look at your code, you can edit it yourself, you can basically do your job as you would do your job. They then package all of the context for the model for you. So you don't have to copy and paste the piece of code you want to look at. It knows what you've highlighted, and it can read all the files, and it can go and search your code base. And then it's got this, what he calls an autonomy slider. So if you can say, hey, go and refactor this whole code base in a different coding language, and it would go and do it for you, and it'd probably do an okay job, but you'd have no idea what you came out the end with, and you would never professionally then serve that up as a piece of your work, because it would be career suicide. But you can also say, hey, go and let's take this step by step, tell me how to do this, and then let's go step by step, and you do this step and I'll do this step. And so I think that's right now the best example of the cyborg approach in software. And really all we're waiting for in sectors like sustainability or in other verticals and other roles is someone to build that tool. And it's just going to take a bit of time. But someone, I mean, you guys are doing it in the sustainability space. Lots of people are doing it in other verticals. But to me, that's what's required is a specific vertical design tool that allows that sort of generation verification feedback loop.
Yeah. And I guess maybe bringing it back to business functions, I think that there are certain business functions where this works really well. And I think it's also partly maybe because all of your three filters check out in the right way, let's say. So, if I look at, let's say, you could have a procurement function potentially. There's generally, I think, a fair bit of flexibility in large scale procurement because it's there are such large volumes, there are so many different suppliers, you have a lot of room and a lot of variables that you can play around with. It's not a binary outcome where if you get it wrong, the business goes bust, and if you get it right, the business succeeds. And so the risk paradigm, I think, works a little in your favor. It's increasingly digitized, or certainly has a lot of potential to go digital. It is relationship based, but actually, if I think of, let's say, a big food business or a big apparel business, a lot of this is going to be commodity purchases. And actually, it comes down to cost, cash, quality, timing, these sorts of things. And so I think actually procurement is probably a great place for AI tools to deliver huge value. On the other end of the spectrum, you could actually see how there might be some other business functions where there's limited room for that. I think maybe not HR in general, but certainly certain parts of HR you could see as actually not having a huge amount because there's a big value in having human empathy, having a relationship based element there as well, having people connection. You can think of some bits where actually digitization has not been super successful. You want peer-to-peer learning to be real workplace based. And I know Octopus has been a big proponent of that. And so I think there are probably certain business functions that just skew really at the other end of the spectrum on your three filters. At the same time, I think what David, you and I are both saying is that probably every team could have a better way of using AI than how most people are using AI today.
Yeah, exactly. So there's just some basics of any role really in an enterprise or an organization: information management, access and retrieval of information, writing things down, documenting things, processes, whatever that are in every role. And so those professional skills, people should be trying to use AI as much as possible and trying to make themselves as great as possible as an employee using AI. And if you're not, I think you'll fall behind very, very fast. Obviously, if you're the maintenance department and your job is to make sure all the air conditioners are working in the building, AI is not really going to help you with that part of the role. So there are some, I think it's like, what is the product of your job? If the product of your job is something like human-to-human relationship or something physical moving around the world or something physical getting built, right now AI is not going to be able to help you too much in actually producing that product. But regardless of that, there's always going to be sort of 10-20% of your role, which is about sort of managing the people around you, managing your relationships, managing all the information that's flowing to you. And AI can do a lot there. So it's a spectrum. It's not like one department will use AI and one department won't. I actually listened to one of your other podcasts where you talked about this concept of like a change department. We're seeing that right now in AI. People have an AI department and their job is to deliver AI to the whole business. That feels like it's going to go the same way as IT and the same way as a change department, which is not going to enable AI in the whole business. It's going to end up with a huge team who everyone else goes, shoo, I'm trying to do my job, leave me alone. And so the key is for each department to think carefully about how they use AI and do it themselves, maybe taking some help from some capability within the business, but not trying to force AI into, because that's how you get rejection of a tool, is if you try to force it on a team.
Yeah, I think that just for listeners who haven't heard that episode, this was a client of mine, which was about 7,000 or 8,000 people, also in the utility space, incidentally, David. And I think the IT team was about 1,200 people and the change team was about 1,000 people. And what we learned was that the change team was largely there to translate IT into the rest of the business and vice versa. And so I think you definitely want to avoid that. And I actually think we have a good opportunity to avoid it with Gen AI because consumers are actually so much further in some ways than their organizations at a personal level. Even if they're using this to find washing machines, I mean, they're using it to like write emails, to also like just, they're still using the tools in a way that doesn't require supervision and support. And I think that there's a learning curve that they're on with that. I want to move over to sustainability teams, though. And David, when you and I last spoke, we talked a little bit about the nature of the sustainability team and what sustainability functions do and are responsible for. I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think are the big use cases for sustainability teams. We've sort of implicitly touched on a few with like site visits to farms and agriculture and so on. But what do you think is actually the magic of what's possible here?
So one of the very hard things about look, I'm by no means a sustainability expert. I've never worked in the space. I've sort of worked adjacent to it. So it's quite clear that you're trying to account for something that's very hard to see, very hard to count, and is often right at the edge of your product usage. So not in a factory where you can put in place like nice controlled counting. So, end of life waste accounting is super hard because the product's gone out into the world, and then how do you account for it there? And that, I think, has led to a whole bunch of the data that's being collected being quite spread out in unstructured places, quite hard to collect. And the brilliance of AI is that makes that life so much easier. So traditionally, I think, where you had to go and read reports to figure out what companies were doing in terms of their sustainability, because it was buried in reports and there weren't centralized databases, you would then have to go and get humans to read all those reports because they were in graphs that were non-standard, and it was just very, very hard to automate. A lot of that can be automated now. A lot of like visual data collection is going to be really powerful. So using multimodal models, you don't need to train a specific model anymore to identify something. So imagine if you're trying to identify a specific waste or a specific thing within your factory, all of that can now be done with generic AI models. So what Gen AI has done is take AI could do a lot of these things, but now we've got these incredibly powerful generic models that can do a lot of the, data extraction, processing, which is great. So it will cause an explosion of data in the sustainability world. The other great thing is it's great at processing it, it's great at searching it, and it's great at getting insight out of it in a non-structured way as well. It can also write code to do that for you. So it can write Python code to analyze stuff, and it'll be able to produce data, search data. And then I guess finally, the really interesting thing I think is it can expose data in a really interesting way. So again, traditionally, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the sustainability space has exposed data through reports and spreadsheets. That is traditionally the interface through which the sustainability teams, either internally or externally, expose their findings and data. Now you can, with AI, you can actually build like web interfaces, you can build chat interfaces, you can almost build like a live agent that anyone can ask questions of and has access to all that data. So I think it's going to create a really interesting way of exposing data to the world that is not, hey, here's my spreadsheet, go and look at it. It's much more interactive and usable.
And David, my next question has an element of bias, but I want to sort of build on your direction of travel. In terms of, you're sort of highlighting all the different things that Gen AI could do within the context of a sustainability functions, use cases, and work. I think there's a piece around how do those sustainability teams access Gen AI? And I understand it as there's sort of three hypotheses for how this could happen. One is that it's direct through ChatGPT, direct through Claude, direct through Gemini, as in you're basically just building more stuff within the sort of the tool that the LLM provider has provided you with. And so, for example, when I'm looking for a washing machine, let's say I have a project in Claude and that project is home improvement and I'm continuing to sort of iterate my washing machine selection, but I'm doing that all in the Claude platform. And that's, I think, hypothesis one. There's a hypothesis two, which I think is a little more layered, where you say actually there are likely to be point solutions that do this thing well and that integrate AI into how they do this thing better. And so in the context of, let's say, sustainability, tools like ours obviously leverage Gen AI. And so when we talk about exposing data in more interesting formats, enabling much more iteration, going from Excel to much more interactive AI-based spreadsheets and tables that can be iterated and live changed, those sorts of things are capabilities that we bring through a software platform that we've developed, and we're bringing it to the customer. And then I think there's a third hypothesis, which is where you say, actually, long term, every large enterprise is just going to build its own single solution for everything. And maybe that's going to be, built onto their own data lake or data warehouse. And actually all their analytics are there and everything feeds into this massive centralized pool of data with a huge sort of analytics, AI-enabled analytics there on top. And everyone is just accessing that. And there are no single point solutions. And that, I guess, is the third hypothesis. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think there's an element of like, what should sustainability teams be looking for? Should they be waiting for that third horizon? Should they be just running ahead with the first? Or should they be out looking for something in the second? And maybe you think I'm all wrong here. This podcast is brought to you by Altruistiq. Sustainability teams have one thing in common. They all have messy data sitting in silos across the business. This means 60% or more of their time is spent getting data into shape and not making sense of that data or using it to drive action. Altruistiq's AI-based tools can help. Meet Evie, your in-house, always-on-call sustainability assistant. Evie works alongside you and your teams to clean up and transform your enterprise data into usable emissions calculations. Even better, Evie helps you interrogate this data, working like the junior analyst you wish you had. AI alone won't solve all your problems, but data transformation is one you can cross off your list. Visit altruistiq.com to find out more. That's Altruistiq with a Q.
No, I like that framework, and you're exactly right. I think if you knew the answer to this, you'd be extremely well placed to make billions and billions of dollars in the VC market right now, because I think everyone's asking that same question. And you're right, it's layers. You've got the LLM itself, And then you've got the sort of interface that the LLM provider provides to that LLM. So the LLMs themselves actually can run on their own. They don't need, ChatGPT doesn't need the chat window. You can actually access ChatGPT through an API yourself. You don't have to be ring-fenced by OpenAI's chat window. Then you've got people building what you would call like LLM wrappers. So those are applications and solutions that embed the LLM. And then you've got people building these big custom tools in-house. Now, there's going to be a huge competition for like who wins all of the enterprise dollars in this world, because obviously the LLM providers want to win those dollars, but equally people building SaaS want to win those. And I don't know the answer to who will win out there. I think what's very interesting is if you look at the last 2 releases that OpenAI, or the last 3 releases that OpenAI have done, they did ChatGPT 5, which everyone got upset because they took away their favorite 4.0, who was like quite a friendly and everyone would use it. He was like, 4.0 was the first sort of really very powerful AI that everyone had access to. And so lots of people fell in love with 4.0, and then when everyone took it away, everyone said GPT-5
in some cases
rubbish.
Literally fell in love with 4.0.
Exactly, yeah. In more cases than we'd wish for. And so that was, I think OpenAI probably saw that as a sort of necessary thing they had to do, but it wasn't a successful launch. If you look at what they've just launched on their dev day, they've just launched 2 things which are not really like improvements in model. They're actually things built around the model. They're things to augment the model to make it more useful. So they launched apps, so you can address Figma, or you can address Spotify, or you can address Booking.com now in ChatGPT. So it's sort of, it hasn't changed the underlying model. It's still GPT-5, but it's given it these superpowers to go and look at Booking.com and search hotels and look at Spotify. And they've also just launched the Workflows SDK, which basically means anyone can go and point and click and build an automated coded workflow that has ChatGPT in it. So if you want to automate yourself and you just want to automate answering emails, you can now do that. And so what you can see is LLMs are trying to reach for that next layer of LLM wrappers and destroy them. And it's sort of a bit of a pitch battle. What I'd say is that a few of the studies have found that the teams and the enterprises that have succeeded most in LLMs are the ones who have built software themselves. So they haven't built a model, but they've gone and built a web tool or a framework or their own chat app, given it all the data it needs, given it context, customized it for their teams, and they've been very successful. And the people who have bought have been less successful. So I would suggest to sustainability teams to start building. The barrier to building is so low now. Even if you do get swallowed up by the LLM providers down the track, that's fine. That's happened in the history of tech before, but you'll get ahead in the process. You'll learn a lot. You'll build the building muscles, and don't wait, because if you wait, the whole sector will pass you by.
Fantastic. Super helpful, David. We've touched a lot on use cases that I think are relatively conventional, in that these are the more or less obvious use cases, but also these are use cases that are quite similar for different business functions. We're talking about how do you clean up data, how do you run analysis better, how do you create more interactivity, and how you query that analysis. And I think while these are certainly true for sustainability teams, they're also true for finance and procurement and sales and other functions. If I look at what Gen AI may unlock for sustainability teams outside of their core business, and now I'm looking very much into some of the stuff that you touched on a little earlier, like downstream impacts and end of life, or upstream agricultural sourcing. I'm sort of looking at this from a double materiality lens, where I'm saying, how do I control the impact that my business has on the world, and how do I control for the impact that the world has on my business as a result of climate change? Do you see roles for or use cases for Gen AI there as well?
For sure, yeah. And they look very, very different. And they're probably not as easily accessible as the ones we're talking about, because they're going to interact with the physical world. And any project that interacts with the physical world is often harder to build than something that interacts with the digital world. And getting stuff out and trialing and piloting things is very, very hard. How do you improve your perception of the physical world, whether that's sort of looking at end-of-life type studies or building monitoring into your own production lines? The key tools there is the multimodality of the new models. So basically the models can now see and hear. And you can also prompt them to sort of just determine what to listen for or look for just with natural language. So you don't now have to train. And, traditionally, if you wanted to go and identify a Coca-Cola bottle in a bunch of rubbish, you'd have to train a specific classifier on that. You can now put that into Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude and say how many Coke bottles are here, and it'll probably give you the right answer. So that generic functionality of being able to sense and understand the real world should mean we can put a lot more sort of sensing type products out there. The second one is how do you actually physically change the world? So change the outcomes. Now that is more frontier tech right now, but there are lots of teams who are working on using Gen AI to look at like proteins, to look at material structures, and use those to basically generate like new proteins, new materials that should help to completely revolutionize. And for me, that's probably where I'm more bullish in terms of Gen AI's or AI's impact on society, because I think it'll be one of those things that AI helps to do. It's, an AI hasn't just sat there itself and decided it wants to invent a protein to solve a specific problem or to, munch through plastic or whatever it is. Someone has told it to do that and worked it to do it. But the enabling thing that it does will be more revolutionary than the fact that we're able to like be 50% more efficient in our digital workplaces.
Yeah, I think, David, the societal impact is enough content for an entirely separate episode, which we should also do at some point. We're sort of coming to the end, but I wanted to run 2 rapid fire questions by you, which have come from our audience. So if I could just fire these at you and maybe get a quick couple of sentences of response, and then we'll wrap up. How do you upskill quickly as a sustainability professional looking to get familiar with AI and AI tools and how to use them?
Very simple answer to that. You just go beyond the chat window. So stop using AI just through the chat window and start figuring out what else it can do. And so some things you can quickly look at are workflows, tool use. So AIs can actually use tools, but they can't really do it in the chat window. You have to use the APIs. MCP, which is this protocol for how you connect AIs to other tools. So that's how you might go and connect to a Spotify or something like that. And then maybe try like a vibe coding platform, something like Lovable, to build something and see how AIs work and build it. So just push it, like with any learning, push yourself out of your comfort zone and you'll learn a lot and upskill through that.
Thanks, David. And final one, how do you pressure test AI to ensure that you can trust it?
This is a solved problem in software. So in software, when you write a piece of software, you write unit tests, and those unit tests determine whether your software produces the right outcome. And so when someone else comes in and changes your software, if those tests break, it's broken. So it's not doing the right thing. You just have to do the same thing with AI. You have to build a bunch of what's called evaluations, which all it is saying, if I put this question into my AI, does it give me the right answer? If you have a data set of 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 of them, and every time you change your AI system, you test against those, you'll then have great confidence that your AI system is still doing what you expect it to do. You can't just sort of keep changing your prompt and changing your underlying model and just trust it's going to do the right thing. You have to build evaluation around it. And I expect evaluations will be like one of the big things in the sort of workplace that no one knew was going to be a big thing over the next decade or so.
Yeah, when I was at McKinsey, my early managers would call this triangulation, where I build a model and they basically ask 2 or 3 tricky questions to expose all the things I've done wrong, and then I have to go back and fix them. David, this has been super insightful. I actually felt like we could probably have run for twice the time, but I think that's all the more reason to bring you back for another episode later on. So just wanted to say on behalf of the show and all our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks very much for listening to this edition of the State of Sustainability podcast. Please hit follow or subscribe so you get notified as soon as our next episode drops.